All right, we're going to get into storytelling. And this is a segment that we've done now for the last couple of years. Over the last couple of years, we focused a lot on the structure of storytelling, kind of the archetypal, what makes a good story. We're going to touch on that a little bit, but I know there are a number of you who've been to these before. So today we're going to focus on specifically finding and telling the stories for Give More 24 for your organization. If you want to afterwards talk about the structure of storytelling and how to use all of that in your life and for telling stories, I'm happy to talk at great length with you about that, but I've been told not to here today. So finding the right story, and this may sound familiar to a couple of you who've heard me talk about storytelling before, but for a nonprofit, I find that the most effective story you can tell overall is a challenge, solution, invitation structure. And what that is there's a challenge. There is some challenge the world has, your community has, people have, that needs to be dealt with. And there is a solution, and your organization has a solution to it. And then you need to extend an invitation to the people you're telling the story to join you in the work of solving that problem. It's basically, it's the full story arc. It's the setup, it's the climax, and it's the resolution. But it's for the idea of the work that you and your organization do, whether it's fighting hunger or helping animals find homes or helping kids learn to read or creating theater that moves people. Whatever it is, there's something out there that needs you, that your organization exists for a reason. You're not all just here for kicks, I certainly hope, because then we can talk about other recreational things that you should be doing with your time. And then you solve these problems, you bring them to the world, and this is a way for you to reach out and invite other people to come and help you solve these problems. Okay, great, Temple. So I'm going to solve all the world's problems, and I'm going to invite people to help me. How the heck do I do that? Because I'm busy solving all the world's problems, but how do I tell my freaking story? So brain dump is one of the easiest ways to find your story. And that was one of the reasons. Everything we do may seem like it's really haphazard, but we actually have a reason for doing it. At the very beginning, when we asked you to make the very complex grid structure on your piece of paper and talked about the key messages, and then we also asked you while you were sitting around to share stories with each other of highs and lows, that was to get you started thinking about your organization in terms of what are the stories that you tell about your organization. So take some time just by yourself is a good way to start, and write down the highs and lows for your organization. Write down all the amazing things that you've accomplished through the life of your organization in the last 6 months, in the last year, and also what were some of the things that you didn't accomplish? What were some of the places that still need some more work? Do that work yourself so that you have a sense of where to go, and then start to take it out in concentric circles, talking with your close staff or board members or volunteers, whatever the structure of your organization is. Get a few people, a few of your key eyes and ears around the table and do that work together. I think that also, like with a lot of collaborative brainstorming, you do the work yourself and then you share your work with others, and what they say inspires you to think about something else, and you inspire them to think about something else. But the best way to get those kinds of results is to do some of the work yourself alone and then share that with others. Emotional themes, something they talk about in the Give More 24 material, and also just in general. People love an emotional story. It doesn't always have to be a heartstring tug. It doesn't always have to be, all the children are starving. We should have those stories if they're relevant to our organization, but it can also be, look at how much joy we brought to someone. Look at how we made the world a better place. Look at these great things. It doesn't always have to be, everything is terrible, open up your wallet. So whatever your organization, whatever makes sense for your organization, think about that. But think about the emotional themes of the stories that you would want to tell. And maybe you have a really high story. Maybe you have something that's really low. And maybe there is something in the middle that is just entertaining and fun and heartwarming. Think about different ways you can frame what happens at your organization. And then ask someone else. So if you are at a loss, if you are like, I am in the weeds, I have no idea what we do, I have a to-do list of 100 things, and that's just before lunch, go to people who know about your organization and ask them what they know. Ask them what has impressed them. If you have top donors, they give to you for a reason. Ask them what motivates them to give to your organization. If you have top volunteers who keep coming back every day because they are so committed to this mission, what do they have to say about why your organization matters and what you should tell other people about why it's so important? And then two, I also like doing, we do this a lot, is we go and we do ask total strangers, have you ever heard of X organization? No? Well, let me tell you about them. But then if you have, what do you know about them? What's the top resonating messages? And rather than trying to correct anyone who may have the wrong impression, just take that in and understand that now you know what's out there. That's one opinion that's out there. And if you need to change that opinion because it might not be correct, you can work on campaigns to change it, but it lets you know what is hitting, what is out there that people actually know about you. I keep walking away from the slides. Remembering your audience, we also talked about that. So when you're figuring out the stories you're going to tell, also try to remember who you're talking to. You have the stories, you have all these different things. Which ones are going to resonate specifically with the people that you want to talk to? And then also, what do you want your audience to do? We all know, Give More 24, you want them to donate, but you also want them to become a committed, long-term, have a long-term relationship with your organization. You know, Give More 24 can't be a day where there are a lot of one-day stands, but you actually want to engage them and bring them in so that you go out with them again, maybe get to know them a little better. You court each other and see if this can become a longer thing. Give More 24 is a great way to build your list and to build your base. So think about whether you want them to also sign up to your email list, to learn about volunteer opportunities, but what do you want them to do? And also, who is the most effective voice to deliver your stories? It doesn't have to be you necessarily, and it doesn't have to be a live voice speaking, but what is the best perspective for those stories to come from? If you're talking to donors, sometimes engaging one of your donors to tell their story can be a really effective way for them to let people know, this is important to me, and here's why it should be important to you. If you have a long-term volunteer who has a great personal story, having it come from their voice can be really effective. Your executive director, your founder, your board chair, those are also good voices, but very often somebody who is, quote, rank and file, who just represents either the people you serve or the kinds of people who are your volunteers, can also be a really effective messenger for what you have to say. I'm gonna let Jim talk now.
Well, one of the things we talked about when it comes to storytelling is really get to the point, make it specific, don't waste time, but still be authentic. This really came to mind a few weeks ago when my wife and I, we were watching an 80s movie. Now, I don't know if you watch any 80s movies lately, but oh my gosh, when they have like those little montages or even like the opening credits, and they just drag on, and they've got that wonderful 80s music going, and you're just like, get to the point, right? And I realized, and this is something that we've actually studied numerous times, because it's all about how you reach people. Well, in the 80s, that probably didn't feel slow at all to them, right? They're watching, they're totally into it. I remember I watched some Jim Carrey vampire movie, believe it or not, there was a vampire movie that he was in. I forget what it was called.
How many channels do you have?
No, we just popped this on. I was just like, I wanted to watch something funny. It wasn't funny. But I got to tell you, it was so long. And I realized that back in the day, that really probably reached, that was probably a great movie. It was funny. It was engaging. Now when you watch movies, and I hear this a lot from like my mom, when I brought her to Star Wars last year, Rogue One. And I remember she was just like, she was so lost because it's just like, it's moving so fast, so much is going on. She just couldn't stay focused on it, right? But believe it or not, like that's kind of what we're used to now. It's sight, sound, generation. Everything's on the tablet, your phone. I mean, you see kids like in the airport. I was just watching a few weeks ago. I was traveling in the airport. I keep pointing out to my wife, like, look at all these kids and everyone's on their phone. And then I'm like, and now look, all the grandparents are over here and they're on their phone. I mean, everybody's on their phone. And it's just, everything's happening so fast. So when you think of your storytelling, you can't, have this long history and this long explanation to draw people in. You got to do it like that. You just got to grab them. You got to keep it very specific. You got to have the details that work and the details that are going to really, bring them in there. But you can't you just can't do it. When I worked for Ed Lynch, I know I've shared this before, and this isn't really a Give More 24 piece, but he would have numerous people ask, for gifts and funds and donations. And it just really hit me one day, because when people would send in some big long letter and be like, here's what my organization's about, and and he'd go through, I just would watch him, he'd just look at it and it'd be gone. He just doesn't have the time to read this, big long explanation of what you need and then the ask. It's amazing that at that level, they just want to know, what do you need, right? And if I know your organization, then you're doing what you should be doing, right? That you don't need to explain everything that you do, and just get right to the point. And that's really what I noticed over and over, really sealed the deal with a lot of the organizations that are just like, right up front, here's what we need, I'm not going to waste your time. And so again, working that into your storytelling, I think in the long run would benefit.
Absolutely, and that's, and that relates to the Facebook Live conversation we were having earlier of, you don't have a lot of time to capture their attention, so make sure that what you do start with is where you want them to be. Now, all of that said about get to the point and don't waste time on all those pesky details about what your organization does, you do need to do that work. You do want to have that. You want all of that background and resource material on your website, in your materials. We are definitely not saying scrap all of that, but for the purposes of Give More 24, set it aside. And so when we have up there also use details, we don't mean have a long laundry list of every detailed thing you've ever done, because people aren't going to read it. But instead, there's the pitch of, Susie lives in a 1-bedroom apartment with her 4 children. They share one bed. Their rent is $1,200 a month. She makes $7 an hour. That's a problem. That's actually getting to the point right away. You can talk about all of your organization and what they do to help remedy that situation, but that's the problem. And I just made that up. I'm sure we could actually make that a lot better and a lot crisper and get to the specific details with a little bit of work, but that's the challenge. And then you offer the solution. We offer grants to help her pay her rent while she's looking for a better job that can support her and her 4 children. You can help us make this possible. That's the challenge, solution, opportunity. Just get right to the point.
There was actually another story that uses emotion. About a decade ago, there was a local shelter that asked, they wanted to do a little bit of branding and marketing because they built a new wing. And so they asked me to come in and do a tour. And so I walked through the building, and they were trying to figure out, like, what's the best story to bring. They wanted all the community members to come in. They wanted church people to come in just to see this place. And it was kind of a little bit out of the way in the area. And I just remember as we were walking through, and I'm kind of taking it all in, there was this lady, probably around 18, and she was on one of the little committees, and she came up and she was talking to me, and I asked her a few questions about, tell me your story, why are you on this committee, you're 18, I mean, everybody else was like in their 40s, and she explained that she actually lived in the shelter when she was like 13 years old, 14 years old, and she explained like the impact this shelter made on her, because they were doing at the time, or when they would leave, when she was with her mom, and she jumped around from shelter to shelter, they would give out these little shoe boxes. And I know I shared this story before, I think last year, but basically she said that in that shoebox, she would like, it was kind of emotional because she actually showed me the shoebox and it kind of blew my mind, but she cut out like newspaper clippings, her favorite bands, and she'd have like their little picture, and she would glue it all inside that shoebox. And then she had her personal, items. She had like candy that she liked, she had a little bit of change, a couple kind of trinkets that really meant a lot to her. And I remember when she said to me, this was my bedroom. And I'm like, what? And she's like, you get to go home and go into a room and close the door, and this is where I would go. So when the world was crazy, I would open up my shoebox and the smells, I could smell my mom, I could smell, things that reminded me of my past. And she said, and I could cry in here, I could be joyful in here. But she said, this was my bedroom. And I gotta tell you, it blew my mind. And I remember after going through this whole little tour, I turned to everybody and I said, you want your story? It's her. And her name was Katie. I said, it's Katie, that's your story. And so what they ended up doing, there was no campaign about a new wing, right? They did a shoebox drive based on Katie. And she went out to the Rotaries, she went out to the churches, and she had her little shoebox, and she blew people away. And guess what? That place was packed with people coming and dropping off their shoeboxes. And then they're like, hey, by the way, check out this wing we just built, right? To me, that sums up everything Temple's talking about. It's the emotion, it's the story, it's that challenge, and then it's overcoming it.
Absolutely, and it's definitely being authentic. And that's probably the biggest challenge and opportunity for you, which is regardless of what your organization is, and I know we have a wide assortment of organizations in the room, be authentic about what your stories are. Remember that you're not trying to talk to everybody, right? You're trying to talk to your people. You're trying to talk to your audience. One of the key things in fundraising and marketing isn't that you're trying to get everybody, because you're not going to, but you need to find your people. Who are the ones who are going to resonate with you? Who are the people who are going to have the commitment to your organization to be consistent and long-term donors? It's okay if you don't get everybody, because you want those specific people. So for your organization, those people are out there. You need to tell the stories that are going to find them. So whatever it is, think about that, be authentic about the experiences you've had, your constituents have had, your donors have had. That is where asking somebody else can come in really handy, because you often don't know. And now that also the story about Katie said, we've talked before too, if you are an organization that works with members of the community, especially children, you also have a policy in place about how you use people's stories, right? Make sure that you do things with their buy-in. And that's something, especially if you are working with underserved and vulnerable populations, you don't want to use anybody, in that sense of somebody being used. But telling the stories about why your organization matters isn't necessarily using somebody. If they are on board, you're telling their story honestly, they're participating in telling their story. And sometimes you'll come up where, for privacy and security reasons, or simply somebody being shy, they won't want to share, they won't want to be the ones sharing their story, but you may be in a position to anonymize them, but take the roots of it. At Parks Foundation, we had that. A lot of the summer programs we would support were kids who we didn't want to put their names and faces out there for a variety of reasons, but we were still able to talk about their stories. We were still able to use quotes from their stories because their parents authorized that, as long as we didn't specifically identify them. And people know that, people get that. So tell those stories. Tell the stories of the people you work with, the people you serve.
So back to the 2 slides ago or so. So you're talking about getting the story from different people that are passionate about your organization. So if you have 1,000 volunteers who work with you each year, you've got grant recipients, you've got all these people that participated in your events. What do you find the best way to get that story from them? I mean, I know political campaigns how to do it, but when it comes to nonprofits, we have some ways that we're trying to do it in the long term, but now in the we're only a few months out, it's hard to gather that story.
Absolutely. No, and in case you didn't hear, so Sunrise was asking about, so if you have a lot going on, a lot of volunteers, a lot of programs, how do you actually gather these stories? Very good question. And that is part of the long term, definitely, is you have your organization that runs 365 days a year, and we have Give More 24 that runs 1 day a year that you spend 3 months building up to. So trying to figure out mechanisms to gather it all the way around so that this time next year you have more is one thing to keep in mind. But then for right now too, something we found, I'm using Parks Foundation just because it has a little bit of a parallel to Watersheds. And so there were a lot of different programs out there, you know, running programs at the parks all summer, running different things throughout the year. And what we would do to find some of those stories was go and talk to the key volunteers, the people on the ground. You probably know, if you sit down and think about it, who some of your key voices are, who the best observers are, who the people who will see the stories, who will know what you're talking about when you come and say what stories are there. You probably know who they are if you think about it. I don't. I can't. They don't all look the same, strangely enough. But you know who they are. They're the people who, when you think about like, okay, it's time to rally the volunteers, they're the ones who pop into your head first. They're your influencers within your organization. And then two, sometimes if you have something going on right now, find a couple of people to go out and talk to them, to actually go and ask those stories. You know your organization better, so you're going to have a better sense of how to get those stories.
Actually, there was a group in San Diego, and they were an environmental group, and they specialized in clean water. And when they were working on a fundraising campaign, what I thought was really unique, instead of, one year they did it, I think it was around like kids and making sure that they have like clean water. But then the next year they did this whole thing just around how water flows. And it was so cool because they tied it into like from puddles to streams. And so what they did is they moved away from the person and people and those stories, but they created a story within. And what was really kind of cool with the puddles was just being able to see kind of this more visual story. And they showed, like, I remember melting snow and like the journey that water takes. And then at the very end, for that emotion, they showed a semi-truck, I remember going through this puddle and leaving residue in the water. And then it kind of like tied into the residue and it showed the dirt. And it was so shocking because you see all this beautiful nature and environment, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, here we come in our big semi-truck and go right through it. So that kind of helps. Like, that was just setting up where it's something you could create, with visual, with words, not just having to find someone.
Yeah, and and Columbia Land Trust, I saw them give a presentation on this campaign they did a year or two ago, and they did it, I believe, related to the Give Guide, the Willamette Week Give Guide, but it was the coolest thing ever. And they, because they have a story that's about land. There are people who are affected by it, but it's not necessarily an entirely human story. It's a story about our land and our environment and conserving our resources throughout the Columbia Valley. And Glenn Lamb is their executive director. And he's been the executive director for, I think, 14 million years. And he's only like 50, so it's really surprising. But he is a character. He is known as the face of the organization. So they used like a Ken doll to create, I believe it was Nature Glenn, and they created this character, and it's how they actually built some of their Instagram account. We were just talking about Instagram earlier. And they positioned Nature Glenn out at a number of their properties, and they took these awesome pictures of Nature Glenn out enjoying it, and he looked like Glenn. It was weird. And it was a really successful campaign because it captured the spirit and the beauty of the places that they're trying to conserve, but it also captured some of the fun and made it was a great Instagram campaign because it was very, very visual, but at the same time highlighting these resources that are why they exist. So in some cases, if your story may or may not be about the people, maybe it is about the place or the activity or the things. Okay. Which relates to the kinds of stories that you can tell. Yay, look at that, it's like there's a plan. Okay, so themes: overcoming adversity, solving a problem, creating a connection. We talked earlier too about some of the lows. In some cases, telling a story about how you didn't succeed can be very effective. If something didn't happen because you didn't get the funds for it, or somebody fell through the cracks, that's an uncomfortable story to tell, but it can be really powerful. With your support, we can prevent that from ever happening again. So sometimes we're very focused on, we want to show like how much good our organization does. We do this, we do this, we do this, support us, support us, support us. That's great. You need to tell those stories so people know that you're an effective organization. But what about that time you tried to help somebody and there just wasn't enough? Maybe that's something. Or, you know, if it's an environmental story, is there something where without, you know, because this surprised us and we didn't have the funding for it, this terrible thing happened. Help us prevent that. It can be a very powerful story. And then origin story too. If you have a founder story and it's relevant, sometimes that can really resonate. A lot of organizations are started because of a cult of personality around one person. And if you are in the part of your life cycle where that is still relevant, then that can be a really powerful story about why did so-and-so start this organization. Now, a lot of organizations did get started by a very powerful person, and they have been slowly transitioning into a more full organization that is getting away from the founder and more into a board-run, staff-run organization. So you do also, sometimes that can be the story of we've actually become institutionalized now. We aren't just one person's dream, we are all of our dream. And so you can talk about that sort of transition as well. And then stories about different kinds of subjects, your constituents, family members, depending on the kind of organization you have. If you're serving people who are very, very vulnerable, sometimes their family members can be really effective mouthpieces for you. If you're in a place where you can't necessarily have the person who has been helped speak, but in many cases when there's a family system, the family members benefit as much from an organization's work as the actual client themselves. So in a lot of cases, telling the story about a mom whose kid went, you know, is in recovery and whose life was saved, and this organization has helped them so much. Oh my God, you know, that could be a really powerful story and will resonate with anybody who has ever had something similar. And then volunteers, telling your volunteer stories, telling your donor stories. Speaking of get to the point, we've already covered that. So. Oh, hey.
What?
We busted through that, didn't we?
That is amazing. So that means it's
Well, it's question time.
Question time.
But what we also, the reason we ended that a little earlier, haha, right, we did have a plan for that, was we talked about how talking with other people can be really helpful sometimes for sorting out your story. So what we wanted to do was leave a little bit of time here for you to talk amongst yourselves for a few minutes, maybe share if you are thinking, if you've thought about something, if you've been using your quadrant page really effectively and writing a ton of notes on it. Jim has. Then talk about some of the things you have. If you're like, you know, I've still got nothing, I don't know, maybe some of the folks at your table can help you out. We'll just do a couple of minutes of that, and then we'll come back and we can talk about questions or possible ideas, share some back and forth on some different thoughts about the kinds of stories you can tell.
so quick few minutes to talk. All right, everybody, one more minute, and then we're going to have a large group discussion. I mean, and it's so cool because you're like, you know, because it's there was something that I just because I just remember she was so she's so she kept bringing like you just say, I know what it is. Look at this little thing about other shoes. Right? Everything flows into it. But I've heard about that. Are you serious? I knew this. All right, everybody.
Okay, we're gonna come back and we're gonna do some sharing.
Sharing
Some
time.
talking.
All right, take
So-
it away, Tumble.
So share. So you guys were talking in your groups, and what we love to do is talk about both some great things that came out of this, from your table, whether it's your story or somebody else's. In fact, I'd love to hear you tell somebody else's story. You know, if there's something that you heard at your table that was like, that's really impressive. That's something that I would share that story and talk about. And then also if there are things that you're struggling with, we'll take a little time to do that. Maybe do a little group think, do a little focus group on how to help with some of those stories. So to start, what were some stories that you heard around the table that you were like, there's something there. That's a really good story.
Should I use the mic?
She was talking about neighborhood newsletters and neighborhood associations. And no one's we share that. She did so well.
Thanks for putting me in the spotlight. So we actually didn't necessarily talk about specific stories. We were more talking about struggles, because all of our organizations have done Give More 24 for several years now, and we feel like we have a pretty good idea of what stories resonate and which ones don't. So we're talking about how to get those stories in front of different people who may not necessarily like our Facebook page or are new to the community. Because we're finding that as much as we raise our visibility, there's a lot of new people coming into Clark County who don't know what Give More 24 is or don't know who our organizations are. So our organization, Columbia Springs, has had a lot of success this year with our staff developing relationships with the neighborhood association that they live in and getting information about our organization in those newsletters. And so I was telling Kyle here, who's with the Community Foundation, that I suggest that they talk to the neighborhood association folks with the city and county to see if we can get information about Give More 24 in those newsletters.
That's great, and that's another, like that goes to some of the different kinds of communication channels that are out there and being able to share some of that news.
And actually, for neighborhood news, I'm the president of the Northwest neighborhood, and that's actually a great point. We have a lot of nonprofits, and if any of you are interested in being highlighted in our newsletter, it reaches 1,400 households. And I gotta tell you, when I'm out there with our different delivery people, they're like, people will come up and they're like, I read this, and I keep it on my coffee table, and I reread it. And you know, with the Columbian, people just like read it, and they're done, if they even read it. But for, you know, Senior Messenger, we see the same effect, because, you know, seniors will read it and read it and read it, right? Over and over for the entire month. And you see that a lot with the neighborhood newsletters. And if you're a business, or if you know people with businesses and nonprofits, you can advertise in a lot of the neighborhood newsletters. That last page, which benefits then the neighborhood, right? So for, I mean, $35, I believe, for one edition, it's a great idea. And so, again, a lot of neighborhood newsletters are looking for nonprofits to share stories. Actually, the Parks Temple wrote a story for our neighborhood newsletter last year, and it was really well received. So great piece.
And whether it's organizational stories or other things you were talking about at your table, what were some things that stood out while you guys were talking? We've got nothing but time, so seriously.
There was so much talking.
I know, you guys were like really engaged. So you were just talking and none of that worked?
They were
None of that
setting
resonated?
plans. They want to go to Billigans. They were setting up like lunch plans.
Yeah, they're like, when are we out of here?
Oh, here we go.
Yeah, I didn't get to tell my story, so I can tell a story.
Okay.
So, Villages, Clark County, we help seniors stay living in their home for as long as they can, as inexpensively as they can, as safely as they can. So a story about that would be the call I got last week from an 87-year-old woman who is driving, does all her grocery shopping, blah, 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 takes care of her house and everything. But what's hanging her up? She doesn't know how long she can keep mowing her lawn. And she says, if I don't get some help mowing that lawn, I'm going into a facility. $3,000 to $5,000 a month. We can do better than that. So the solution is we can have a volunteer come over and mow our lawn. We can do better than that. We can work with the Boy Scouts and send the Boy Scouts to our members to do a variety of lawns that day.
Excellent, excellent. And that shows, I mean, there's so many different kinds of stories. So if you don't want to share really fantastic things, because I know you guys have them, you're just not sharing them. Okay, Leanne.
Can I? Yes.
Yeah, if you're gonna share a good story,
Appreciate your permission.
don't sell somebody else out.
So they have a specific need, and that always kind of keeps you focused on what you're getting or what you're asking people to give for. They need space to build the props, the stages. Like they have a stage, but they don't have a backstage to hide the props that they're working on. And so to be using the stage to build the next set means they can't do anything with that stage at the time. And so they have that just helps a lot when you have a very clear, this is what we're going to do with it.
Mhm. Absolutely, and that's something with Give More 24, regardless of what you're specifically fundraising for, if you haven't figured out what you're doing, sometimes having a very targeted campaign, making it for something specific can be really helpful, making it for one program you're doing or one specific need that you have. Working with a food bank that needed to replace their delivery truck. That was an incredibly successful campaign for them because we had this one specific thing. And that message, when you're talking about needing to be quick, be sharp, be to the point, one specific thing can be a really good way to go about it. If we could also make sure that Jim gets his exercise by continuing to go across the room.
There we go.
So if it is one specific thing like that, then is it a good idea to set a dollar amount? If you, for example, using that delivery truck as a good example of that. So would you want to say these are so many, this is the amount of dollars we're hoping to raise for that?
I'm going to give a cautious yes. You don't want to leave money on the table. So picking something that is realistic. I think that one of the things that organizations can do when doing any development planning, any fundraising planning, is think about what your real capacity is. You know, like say a delivery van, in the case of this particular organization, it was like 10 grand. And so looking at their resources and their ability at their list, okay, we think we can get there. You know, it wasn't 50 grand and it wasn't 500. So it was like, okay, that seems reasonable. If your specific need is $500 and you actually want to raise $15,000, then don't limit yourselves. But something that we've seen a lot of organizations do, and you do this at your special appeals, at your fundraisers, you can do it for Give More 24, is say your donation of X dollars can help us buy this. And the nice thing about that too, just making sure you use your wording correctly, it's not a specific targeted donation, like your $5 is going to buy lunch for this one person, but say like, this is the kind of thing that your money can raise. When you donate $10 to us, you help us do these kinds of things. So especially if you do have some specific needs that may be smaller dollar amounts, that could be a good way to get the word out, to make it specific, but not leave money on the table.
One more question, sorry. So being that this is an online event, we have potentially a global reach. I know we kind of think about our local community, but as far as national, I mean, we all have families and family connections elsewhere in the country. Is there a language that we could use to reach out to those that are farther away, do you think?
What's your organization?
With the ARC of Southwest Washington. I mean, and they have chapters all over the country, but, you know, people that care about me personally might like to, you know, invest.
The reason I'm kind of pausing on that, something that I've seen from organizations I've worked with directly and that I've also heard, something that can happen that can help your specific fundraising for the day of, so do not discount it, is reaching out to your personal network and folks who are your friends and your associates and your family members all across the country will want to support you and want to give. And that's awesome, and that gets your numbers up and it helps you get to a specific prize. Something to think about when you're targeting, if you're targeting those people, is about what the life of that donor is after Give More 24. Are they somebody you can cultivate for a longer term relationship, for longer term donations? That isn't me saying, I'm going to give you an answer that isn't an answer because it's not necessarily good or bad. I definitely support for something like Give More 24, reach out to your people. The minimum donation is, it's easy. Everybody can do it. There's no reason not to. And they can support you specifically, but also have a sight to what else you're trying to do and the list you're trying to build. We had cases, and we had this actually a couple of years ago at Parks Foundation, where a lot of people gave to support, but they were supporting their friend, because we got a lot of community members involved in the fundraising. And so it took a while to sort of sift through that list after the fact and see who was cultivatable, who we could retain, and who was kind of a one-off. And if we ever got that board member involved in something specific again, they'd probably give again. But their sister-in-law lives in Maryland, and they're not gonna be a constituent. So think about that. What else?
This lady here at our table, she just sat down and she started telling us who she represents, what her story is. And I immediately thought about the advertising because I believe it was yesterday's Columbian. They have a full page ad, color the whole bit. So I'll let her tell you how she's.
Great, I should really let Val tell you how she did that. I'm with Dog Paw, that's the off-leash dog parks. One of our big stories, of course, is to tell people it is not funded by Clark County. It's not funded by any government agency. It's all paid for by donations and sponsorships from business. So that's one of the big stories to get out. But we really have two forms of constituents or people that we're looking to reach. One is individuals who may use the dog parks. We estimate that only a fraction of the people who go to dog parks are also members. At $25 or $50 a year, you can see it's only pennies a day for people. So that's one group. The other group is businesses who maybe have a heart for dogs or pets, right? Because that goes with their business. But there are a lot of people who own small businesses in Southwest Washington, for instance, Skipper's Restaurant, right? They don't have a dog relationship because they feed humans, but they have dogs and they're passionate about supporting us. So those are the people, the twin groups we're trying to reach.
Awesome, and congratulations, Dog Paw, because you guys have like in the last few years really done a lot of work on your earned media and PR, and there's a great need. But yeah, and I was one of those people when I had a dog. I was one of those people who was like, I love the dog park. Oh, we should be members. So be members of the dog park.
Dogs for dogs.
What else? Anything you're struggling with where you're like, we don't have a story. I don't know what's going on.
So, I just want to ask this. So, wouldn't her story be potential to go to this restaurant and say why we love dogs, and maybe you actually have a place outdoors where people come and bring their dogs as a brew pub or something? I don't know, but wouldn't you tell that story from how that person tell it from that perspective?
Very
Rather than an
conceivably.
organization telling you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like
And
that restaurant tell that story.
And it kind of seemed like that was the direction where you're going, as a lot of the outreach is sort of having the people who love the dogs start to tell about why they support this organization. And that's something which having your people talk about why they support you is so effective. People are ready to hear that about I donate to the Haug Foundation because I care so much about the kids on the west side of Vancouver. I give to this. I'm a member of the board for Friends of the Columbia Gorge because I believe the gorge is a resource that we need to continue to preserve. Those kinds of things is much better than somebody from their staff coming and saying, here's why we should do it. They know more than me, but if they give me the right talking points, I can be a super effective messenger. Nancy, do you have something?
I know. I just want to give him some exercise.
It's good.
Actually, one thing when we were talking about telling our stories, I realized that last year was our first year with the event. We did fairly well, but we tried to tell too many stories. We have 5 different programs and we actually did little spiels on all of them. This year we will narrow it down to one program, focus on it, and have both people who love to donate to it, and people who've been served by it as the voices and not even worry about the other 4 programs.
No, and that's great, because yeah, get somebody in, tell them what you think is the most compelling thing, and then once you've got them, and you've got them on your list, because now you have their email address and you have all of their information, no stealing identities, but you can definitely add them to your newsletter list and start to tell them all the other things about why you're so awesome.
But not that day.
Yeah, exactly. There'll be enough deluge on that day.
Yeah.
We are coming up on break time, so unless there is anything pressing. All right, let's take a 10-minute break and we will come back for talking about the Giving Day events.
Our favorite part.